Hi, welcome to part 2 of the F150 4.2 water leak intake gaskets and manifold install. As you can see, I have the gaskets installed and I have RTV around the water ports. I do that just because even though the gaskets are new, a lot of times there's enough pitting around there that may or may not seal correctly, and it sure is a pain in the ass later on to find out you got to do it again because water's leaking into the engine. And I have RTV on the front and back seals. That's personal preference, but at least you need to make sure that you put RTV in this corner here, and this corner here on the bottom and top of it, back there and back there. That's the minimum that you need to do. The rest of it's all personal preference. As you can see, I have the intake gaskets already installed, ready for the intake to go back in. Here's the bolts. I was telling you earlier, there's 6 of them that are long. Whoops, those aren't. Those are. I'm sorry. Those are the upper intake bolts. Here's the bolts right here. There's 6 long ones, as you can see. Pretty self-explanatory, and then 8 short ones. Those are the short ones. They go on the top part. This goes on the bottom part. Pretty easy. As you can see, they had Loctite on when they were from the factory. That's personal preference. I'm not going to Loctite them. And here's the old gaskets. I just wanted to show them to you just for the heck of it. As you can see, one thing you want to make sure, if you do put RTV around these ports right here, see there's a hole. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a hole right there on that block off. Don't get RTV in that hole, because what that is that's an air bleed. And if you block the hole off, then there may be an air pocket there, and that may cause problems. So always make sure that if you put RTV around it, you don't get RTV in that. So I'm going to go ahead and shut this off and install the intake, because I'm sure that y'all don't want to sit here and watch me wrestle with an intake and cuss and all that good stuff. But anyway, I will put the intake in, torque it down, and then I'll point out a couple of things, and then we'll get the fuel lines in and stuff, and we'll go from there. All right. Okay, the lower intake is now installed, and first you torque. If you can see on the chart here, first you torque all the bolts to 44 inch-pounds, or 5 Newton meters if you have a metric torque wrench, which probably don't. Notice the arrow. The arrow means forward. So don't make a mistake and look at this picture and try to torque from here back. You actually need to be right and turn that picture around like that right there. Then you take the picture and lay it down here next to the intake so you can get the numbers right. And once you torque it that, then you go back and torque it again to 71 to 101 foot-pounds, or inch-pounds, I'm sorry. Remember, don't get the foot-pounds and inch-pounds mixed up. And I went ahead and just did it to 100 inch-pounds because I figure a little bit higher on the end ain't gonna hurt nothing. They just had that long list. I assume that they, on the assembly line, it probably just kind of guesstimated it. But you want to make sure. I'm going to point out a couple things really quick. You want to make sure there's a bolt back here in the back where I'm looking. I know it's kind of hard to see. Back there, you want to make sure you get that bolt. I guess I'll put the light down here so you can actually see. And just make sure you get all the bolts in the right places, and you can see that the injectors are actually located in the head, not in the manifold, because a lot of the vehicles have the intake manifold. The injectors are actually mounted in the intake manifold and the intake runners. But I assume because of the split port system on this, which by the way is very similar to the split port system they used in the Windstar minivan, which is the same engine, 3.8 liter, became a 4.2. But it actually proved itself to be a fairly reasonable engine in a truck. Of course, you know, they had so many issues with them when they first came out, 3.8s. They did a gigantic head gasket recall when I was working at Ford. But these engines, the first batch of them, of course, they had an issue with the front cover gaskets were not of good quality, and they had a bad habit of leaking into the engine, and the engines would eventually hydrolock, because antifreeze will destroy bearings in a matter of months. I mean, you get antifreeze in the engine, it's bye-bye, you know. And sometimes you know, you won't see it until it gets too bad. You know, just a small amount isn't gonna show up. But now that we've got the intake on, I'm gonna go ahead and plug everything up and get the injectors on and get the fuel lines plugged back in. And when I get that done, I'll give another update and show a couple other things I'm going to do, and we'll go from there. All right. I have the fuel injectors installed, as you can see here on both sides. You want to make sure when you clean the O-rings to go back into the head that you put some WD-40 or something on them so they'll slide in. And then when you push them in, you get them all lined up, and you push them down and they'll feel like they click a little bit, kind of like they lock in. Make sure they get seated real good, or you'll have a vacuum leak. Also the connectors, make sure you get all the connectors. The wiring harness, if you notice here, if you look where my finger's at, you can see a zip tie. And there's zip ties that were on the factory wiring harness, and I cut them off when I took them off, so I went ahead and re-zip tied the wiring harness down. Then I went ahead and installed the adapter, or the bypass pipe, back into the top of the front cover. You can look down there, there's an O-ring, a little RTV around it just for added insurance. Slide it in, tighten the bolt down, and then it comes up. It's got the two lines. This line and this line here go to the PCV cooler, which is on the back of the intake. And then it also has the bypass pipe right here, the one we knew when we installed. And I put the hose back on. Just shortened it and put it back on. Like I said, the guy doing it before said he wants this as economical as possible, so I just shortened the hose and put it back on there because it was a longer hose, you know, to go down over the pipe some more. But you can see how it's installed. So all we have left now is, well, I went ahead and reattached the connector down here. Made sure there's another connector here. I zip tied it up out of the way because it was attached to this pipe at one time, and the little piece that clips the connector on broke off, so I didn't want it to fall into the fan or get anything, so it zip tied up out of the way. Just like I said, take your time, especially when a vehicle like this is a 99 model, so you figure it's, you know, it's 15 years old. So all these little plastic pieces aren't connected anymore. They're falling off, they're breaking. You want to make sure everything's kind of secured out of the way, because you don't want to have any issues 6 months down the road after you put it back together where something rubs through, or you have a no-start situation one day, because that's the cam sensor, but it'll still run without it. It'll just run really, really badly. I mean, buck and kick, and man, you think everything in the world's going bad. But that replaced the distributor, because the distributor used to be over here in the older vehicles. But all I got left now is to go ahead and put the upper intake on. Put the bracket, this bracket here bolts to the side of the intake. These two water lines here and here go on the back. There's a PCV line that runs underneath the intake that goes over there into the hole in the corner. You want to make sure you get that connected correctly. If the hose is rotted, you want to go ahead and replace the hoses, because that will create a terrible vacuum leak and make the thing very bad to drive. Like I said, here's the hoses. Notice this hose here has this little crimp. That's like a restrictor of some sort to help slow the water flow down through the heater core so it heats better. Everything's pretty self-explanatory. So like I said, I just wanted to hit on some of the stuff that you might run into when you're reassembling this yourself, kind of like this little pointer thing, like, hey, I found this out, or hey, I figured this out. Here's Schrader valve if you ever want to know where that's at. Connectors, I mean, just make sure you WD-40 those up real good, and then make sure they lock in really tight. You know, wiggle them, make sure they're in. You don't want them to pop out or start leaking on you. Everything else is pretty self-explanatory. Here's the new gasket for the intake manifold. You see, it's got little built-in rubber around it. Here's the old gasket. I think this is factory. I'm not really 100% sure. I can't remember, but it looks like it anyway. You can see that's the old gasket. You can see it was starting to come apart in places, but that was just, you know, age. It's a fairly, I mean, it feels like it's like a Kevlar material almost. Probably something more than, you know, more than paper. But I'm gonna go ahead and get the upper intake on, and if I see anything else I need to point out, we'll point it out. But I also want to say that I've also already changed the oil. Anytime that you have an intake off, water is going to get down into the engine crankcase. After you're done putting everything back together, change the oil. I went ahead and changed the filter too, but being the engine hasn't run, you don't need to change the filter unless it's due for it. I decided that I looked at the filter, and the filter looked, you know, dirty and nasty, and I said, well, that's been on there long enough for it to get dirty. So I went ahead and opted to change the filter. But that's already done. I've got the oil back in there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get the intake on. I'm going to get all that buttoned up, and I'll come back and hit on a couple things after I get that on, and then we'll get the antifreeze back in, and we'll get it fired up and see if it doesn't leak anymore. All right. Okay, we're back again. We've got the upper intake installed, and we have torqued it to 71 inch-pounds, as you can see from the piece of paper that I have right here. That there's 14 or 12 volts. 53 inch-pounds the first time, 71 inch-pounds the second time. Remember, look at the arrow. So I put it like this so I can pay attention to it. Got it on there, got it torqued down, got all the hoses installed, got the coil pack back on there. You see I labeled all the wires, some duct tape, and you can look at the picture here. Remember, it's upside down too, because the back part of the bracket for the coil pack goes in the back. So if you notice, it's 1, 2, 3 on this side and 5, 6, 4 on this side. So I've seen a lot of people make mistakes when they get done with something. They put it back together and find out that they got a plug wire messed up, and then the thing don't run right, and then they're shaking their head trying to figure out what's going on. And you can see there's the cylinders numbering 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6 on this side. Nothing else. It's pretty straightforward. Like I said, just take your time. Make sure everything is installed. So all we got left now is to put the mass airflow sensor, air filter, intake assembly on, and put water in. We've already changed the oil. Don't forget to hook up the cable back up. So we're gonna go ahead and do that, and we'll fire it up, and then we'll have one last little section of this to show that everything, hopefully, cross fingers, everything will be fine. Success. So we got her all back together and we got her running. Everything so far is clean and tight. Basically, just when you put it back together, just make sure you get all the vacuum lines, get everything hooked up. I had a vacuum line off when I first started it, and I had to go back through and double check my work. So all I gotta do now is just go test drive, and looks like it's done. But as far as the RTV that I use the ultra gray or ultra black, and I use it pretty much, you know, for everything. That's why I buy it in a tube like this. It'll keep for a while. But it sure beats the heck out of that old green and red stuff we used to have years ago. But I thank you for watching this video. As like I said, this is just a helpful video on the F150 with the 4.2. I hit on a few things. Like I said, just mainly just take your time, make sure you get everything back together. This actually is a very easy intake and upper intake and lower intake to change, and should get a few more years of life out of this truck. It's got I don't remember how many miles it got on it. We'll have to go look. Oh, I guess 224. I know you can't hardly see it from here, but got 224 869 on it, and so that's not too bad. Like I said, it runs pretty good. It's a 5-speed. One thing I really have to say, you know, not talking too much propaganda or whatever, but these trucks actually get fairly decent gas mileage. I've seen upper 20s on the highway, and when you go to figure out what you got to give for a new truck today, if they get the kind of mileage, I mean, it really makes it affordable if you want to drive one back and forth to work, extended cab and everything. Yeah, like I said, hopefully y'all like this video. Like I said, I'm gonna edit all this together, and thank you for watching.